welcome everyone to a public event organized by Philosophy Sharing Gozo at Circolo Positano. Today we will be having as a speaker Dr. Karl Borġ, who will be discussing nonsense, informal fallacies, and categorical mistakes, followed by a short question and answer session afterwards. Dr. Karl Borġ has been teaching philosophy for over 30 years now. He has founded St. Thomas Institute of Higher Education in Floriana, Malta. He studied at different universities in Malta, England, and the United States of America, and he is also a published writer. So I now give the floor to Dr. Karl Borġ.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Welcome to Philosophy Sharing Gozo. Gozo brings me memories. Some 20 years ago, I used to cross the waters early in the morning, Saturdays, and used to give some lectures in philosophy at the Sala tal-Katedral, and I used to really have nice groups. So Gozo brings me nice memories. I see some foreigners, probably residents of Gozo now. Welcome also. What I propose to do today is, shouting enough? To present some ideas. You can stop me when you want to. I'm used to doing community of inquiry sessions of philosophy, especially with Matthew Lipman. He was a great friend of mine. I used to travel with him United States and some places in Europe too. So you can stop me whenever you want to. This sounds to be better now. So I propose to discuss with you some ideas. I myself admit that they come to my mind, that is, in a fragmented matter. I am also an artist, so I paint. I'm going to present you with some of my paintings too, trying to give more strength to the point in discussion. But from my experience, what is fragmented, it is also not fragmented. So it's up to you to make your own conclusions then. And I'm starting by introducing the character of Pulcinella. Then I will convey some ideas on the concept of nonsense, informal fallacies, which is a very hot topic in some syllabi here, in Malta especially, and it's gaining again importance even internationally. Categorical mistakes, and I make some reference to unsound reasoning, let's use that word, unsound reasoning, when we're thinking through metaphor, through the use of metaphor. Let me present you with one of my paintings. I called this painting Smiling with a comma, and for me it's important, the comma, because if we don't do the comma, we don't put the comma, we'll be committing the first categorical mistake. Smiling, women, and spaghetti. It's a very strange painting. One of the paintings that I made after I went through a very serious operation. I call this series of my paintings the Bypass Collection. And I also put a strange name for my art. I call my style Dakukuism, borrowing from Dada, Caravism, and Cubism. Now that's a picture which, again, in a way, is fragmented, but it can be interpreted in so many different ways by so many different people. Can be taken as nonsense. But sometimes nonsense is not real nonsense. No? Okay. Now, why did I put the character? Let's call him a character, Pulcinella, because in the Maltese subconscious, Pulcinella means a lot. Of course, the character is a very stereotyped character that we borrow from the Commedia dell'arte, and there you have some pictures of the Commedia dell'arte. The Commedia dell'arte was the art of comedy, and we find a lot of nonsense in comedy. But again, nonsense which is real, which is not real nonsense. It is in improvised theater. So the plot is very easily going. It reminds me in the sessions that we used to have with Matthew Lipman, because there we used to have many Latin Americans. And we used to end the night drinking Californian wine, and these Latin Americans singing their songs on the guitar. And after 6, 8 songs, I started to tell them a song, and they told me, why? How can you say what we are going to say? Because it's very predictable. A young man falls in love with a young woman, and they go through trouble, etc., etc. So we borrow the character Pulcinella from the Commedia dell'arte. But in Maltese, when we say you're a Pulcinella, although some people might believe that Pulcinella is a female character because it ends with an R, Pulcinella is a male character, right? And there the plot. These performances usually used to be let's put it this way, have parts before or after. I remember these types of performances in what we call in Maltese the teatri, the village or street theatre, called lazzi in Italian, whereby the actors, probably the most important ones, would bring to the attention to the crowd or to the audience jokes, practical jokes, but with many comments on the current state of affairs. And there you have some other characters, Pantalone, Zanni, and that's another one of my paintings. I call it the grand design, or the multiple faces of a clown. And with that I want to point out this idea of the multi-interpretation that's available to the humankind, to everybody. An individual need not be a philosopher to multi-interpret. And when we talk of nonsense, of course we're referring to sense, we're going to say something about sense. We usually put ourselves in positions of multi-interpretation, all right? That's another nice picture of the Pulcinella. So we have different pictures there. Pulcinella is a character used to be a personification of the social and cultural aspects. And as such, this character influenced for many centuries not only our social life, but also our language and interpretation, of course, because when we say language, I remember my lectures on the philosophy of language. At one time, we used to equal language with interpretation. Right? So why philosophical pulcinellas? I borrowed and extended the metaphor to philosophical pulcinellas because at the end of the day we have to ask the question if we are in search of truths, to what extent we are pulcinellas or not. To what extent when we talk, when we listen to other people, are we affirming truths? What are truths after all? Are we talking sense? Are we talking nonsense? What is truth? What is validity? Right? So this is how this idea came to my mind. When we talk about sense and nonsense, another concept comes to mind, and this is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude usually is used in literature. It is compared to the simile, to the analogy. And again, when we're comparing and when we're creating analogies, it doesn't mean that we are correct. Now let's say something about sense. Well, the word sense is in fact a neurological term. It refers to the sense organs in the body. And most people still think that we have 5 senses. In the old, they used to believe that even the brain is a sense. They used to conceive of the brain as being a sense. And of course, with neurological studies, we discovered that the brain does not only receive, but it also sends out, and it also processes information. But most people still believe that the word sense relates to the 5 sense organs that we have in our body. And as a matter of fact, physically, we don't have 5 senses, but at least neurologists identify 6. Sense of touch, smell, taste, etc., etc. With that, they include the sense of proprioception, which is a very microscopic structure tied to the muscle cells. They call it the muscle spindle, and it gives a sense of positioning of our body. But it's a bit of information about the word sense. In our language, however, when we use the word sense, we can make a number of references. We can refer to a number of issues, perspectives, interpretations. For example, you have some sentences there. He has no sense of right and wrong. And where does the sense organ in our body is going to relate to the right and wrong? Well, if we are Freudian, we would say, well, let's go to the pleasure zones in the body. But most people don't have that type of knowledge, but they use the word sense. He has no sense of right and wrong. War had given to the community a greater sense of togetherness. That's another meaning of sense. I felt a sense of betrayal when my friends refused to support me. Again, another different meaning of sense. He has no sense of responsibility. They felt a deepening sense of despair. All the words there, as you are discovering with me, carry different connotations, carry different meanings. So what do we really understand by the word sense? Is it in itself nonsense? So if we can't work out what the word sense means, you can imagine how difficult it is, more difficult it is to talk about nonsense. There's a very nice picture. It's called The Allegory of the Five Senses by Peter Klaas. And you should show the guitar, etc., etc. There is a tortoise there. Some people interpret that the artist wanted to refer to time. Now, although we don't very much understand exactly what sense and nonsense mean, these two words are used quite often in our language, in ordinary language, in everyday language. And that's an extract that I took from an article about art. And it's making an appeal. Dear museum, stop making nonsense. It's time for museum to desist with the silly spectacles and get back to the good work they could be doing in the civic sphere. And by nonsense, this article carried the following pictures. So I leave it up to you whether these are nonsense or not. That's a rendering of Carsten Hollier's one of the slides. Actually, it was in an exhibition at the Hayward Gallery, which is a very prestigious place. But this author thinks of that as being nonsense. There's another picture which was part of this article as being depicted as nonsense, which for me it is not. Again, that's another picture, the Rain Room at the Museum of Modern Art. So this author is interpreting these pictures as being nonsense and silly. This very famous rubber duck, it was touring Shanghai by Florentine Hoffman, and again is depicted as being nonsense. Now, this of course leads us to the so many interpretations that we have on the plate for the humankind to use. And for me, this is the strength of art. And the more of philosophy that I do, and the more of art that I do, I always increase my belief in art as philosophy. That's a statue, a very famous statue. It's called The Kiss. There is that very nice bonding between a man and a woman. It's Rodin's statue. It's in the Tate's Gallery. It's a very famous one. But let me show you my interpretation of a bond. So I call this painting of mine The Everlasting Bond, which is another interpretation. So which is the more sensible, my picture or Rodin's picture, or any other picture, or any other interpretation? There we are at a loss when we especially are using ordinary language or writing even academic papers. Who is going to be the judge on our conceptions? The humankind is so rich in providing so many interpretations. And what's nonsense for somebody could be sensical for another, or what's sensical for one person can be nonsensical to another person. This is another interpretation of mine of a bond, but in it I wanted to depict sadness. It's called The Kiss of Mother and Son Before She Died. It's another type of bond. The first one could be interpreted maybe in a humoristic way, but it's probably, we wouldn't put humor in it. Probably most people would put sadness in the sense of the interpretation. So many people talk especially about the sanity of art, whether art is sane or not. For example, Bernard Shaw wrote a book on this, and I suggest that if you have some free time, you go through that. But of course, as a philosopher, the word sense, to me, now this is much more than an artist, because as an artist I put a different interpretation to the word sense. Always he relates, I'm very Frege, I don't know whether you know about this philosopher, but Frege was a very important philosopher, and who talked and wrote a lot about the philosophy of language, and always associated sense, reference, and meaning. And Frege, we'll meet him later on, we will talk about categories. Frege paid a lot of importance, as do most philosophers, to the idea of truth. And that's why we have so many philosophers going into the philosophy of language, because they wanted to establish meaning in order to be verificationists, to find the truth. So what can we say about the truth? Again, the idea of truth to our students of logic, there we give another idea. Of course, we use the truth and the false values, but in order for an argument to be sound, we say it is valid or invalid. But the concept of truth in the wider arena of life can be attached to so many different corners of our lives, can be assigned to statements, to sentence tokens, sentence types, propositions, this is of course very logical, to theories, to facts, assertions, utterances. An utterance is not necessarily equivalent of a sentence or a statement. Beliefs, opinions, doctrines, art, and the list is a never-ending one. So again, we are at a loss when we try to identify. I hope I'll have another occasion in Malta where I will be delivering some more technical ideas on truth, because the truth has been researched very much, especially in 20th century philosophy. But again, if we want to be more technical, then we might have to opt to use other words, like, for example, the concept of validity. The concept of validity makes a lot of sense when it comes especially to psychometric testing, to psychology. We find so many students writing their PhDs especially, in the form of picking a hypothesis. They provide two variables, one dependent, the other independent variable. Then of course, after conducting experiments, they would hope also to provide criteria of validity. There are so many nicknames for the different types of validity. They usually use another concept, the concept of reliability, but that's much more statistical. So we can talk of external type of validity, generalized population validity, internal validity, and there is again a list: concurrent validity, predictive validity. That would be really great, especially for the scientific process, when we can predict through some type of a scientific process. I think it's very relevant to introduce two concepts at this stage of my delivery here. And this is the concept of reasoning and thinking. Although it is used interchangeably by many people, in philosophy we try, and also in art perhaps, we try to make a distinction. Reasoning is the process whereby a logical way brings forward a relevant conclusion or not. Thinking is probably slightly different. And I always am in disagreement with Edward de Bono, because I think he made a lot of fuss about this idea of thinking. And at one stage, I think he says that he hates philosophy, especially he calls them the three stooges, Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, because he hates philosophy. And I think he never understood what philosophy is and the difference between thinking and reasoning. Because everybody can think, but not everybody can reason things out. There's a very big difference for me. So perhaps we see much more thinking in art, although I put a lot of reasoning myself and I can't help it. But there are probably two different processes. I can think of an abstract number. I can think of any color, and this is why I love art, without reasoning. But when I try to put it on a wide surface, then I start reasoning. Of course I do. But there are two different aspects of life. And I don't think we can just live by thinking, or we can just live by reasoning. There are two attributes of the humankind. So I'm going to use these two platforms in my delivery here, because they are, for me as a philosopher and an artist, both important, but I realize that they are different. They can, of course, cross borders, because everything in life can. Even without us, even the physical rules in the cosmos, they cross borders all the time. And maybe there are universes of which you don't know that they do that all the time too. But let me now concentrate on one of the subtitles of the talk, of the topic today. It's what we call in philosophy categorical mistakes. First, let me say something about categories. I am going to put these ideas forward because even as a lecturer myself, using the usual available books, usually when we teach our students category mistakes, probably we don't teach them much category mistakes, but in formal fallacies we do. We have this ready-made textbook with a number, exact number of, say for example, the copy. When we come to the informal fallacies, there is a number, and students think that maybe there are 22 informal fallacies, and we discover later on in the talk that there are much more. And I used to conduct a small experiment with my students at the high school. So I used to give them about 22 informal fallacies during the first 3 months of college. And then I used to give them an assignment to discuss informal fallacies. And I did this experiment over a number of years in different groups. I used to lecture to about 20 classes per year. So the evidence is quite substantial in this way. I used to give them this same essay, discuss informal fallacies. So only very few who gave me at least those that I gave them. Some of them, they would give me 5, 6. Then I would say, why? They would say maybe, well, because I didn't like the others. And you see, they're already committing a categorical mistake. So, category mistakes, first of all, and what we call informal fallacies, although they are baptized differently, these two procedures in thinking or reasoning, cross the bridges a lot. But we always, in my opinion, including myself when I started, missed the richness of what we understand by categories, or what at least philosophers understand by categories, because after all, I was lecturing philosophy. So, categories is a system, let's put it this way, a system of categories, what you have there on the slide. A system of categories is usually considered to be a list of the highest kind, a sort of a meta-language. On language, when I say language, I have this bias. Language is what we understand symbolically. So categories, and actually all philosophers did this, starting from Aristotle to our time, thought of categories as being kinds, genera of a higher order, belonging to higher order thinking about thinking. So traditionally, following Aristotle, these have been thought of as the highest genera of entities. Okay? But all of them point to the question of what is there, that is ontology, right? So there you have a list of category systems, and we have to point out these category systems because when we think or when we reason, we have so many types of categories, and therefore so many types of category mistakes that we can commit. Why it is so difficult for us philosophers to pass judgment, to assert the truth. So there you have what we call Aristotelian realism, Kantian conceptualism, Husserl, the famous phenomenologist, descriptivism, contemporary category systems, and people are skeptical about these categories. And categories of other disciplines, not only in philosophy. Right? But let me say something very quickly on each of them. Of course, the classical one, which I also referred to in my annual talk at the philosophy sharing meeting we had, a very nice crowd there of people at the St. James Cavalier, and I thank Father Mark especially for inviting me to that occasion. So I mentioned these categories there, but for another purpose. So, but the most classical remains that one, produced by Aristotle 2.5 millennia ago, but you see that it is still relevant. And this is why I consider Aristotle a genius myself, and I'm a great admirer of his thoughts. And that's why I think people like Edward de Bona are being ridiculous when they discard these great minds, that civilization has brought about. So Aristotle talks about substance, quantity, quality, relation. Well, relation, you have Einstein there. Place, date, posture, state, action, passion. So many different types of categories. Kant also produced his system of categories, of course inspired by Aristotle, but he put some other concepts like negation, plurality, totality, unity, limitation, existence, necessity, possibility, a concept which I also mentioned in the annual philosophy talk, and I refer to Bolzano, because Bolzano was a very famous logician, who put in ontology this idea that existence, he thought of existence as possibilities. And what a beautiful concept. We shall not go into many technicalities, but of course Husserl, who was a phenomenologist, his system is much more descriptive. Why? Because he was very much interested in describing. Some contemporary categories of systems, space-time is a modern concept, state of affairs, grounded relation, inertia, spontaneity, but there is also fictional. Fiction is also a category. So many times I am introducing you to these concepts to make you aware on how many types of categories we process maybe every day in our lives, or when we're doing some type of academic exercise, and in how many ways we can go wrong. That's another classification, very modern, 1996, by Chichon. It is entities, contingent and necessary. Then it's subdivided into states, events, individuals, boundaries. This is a very nice concept. Why? Because again, we tend to put so many boundaries on the way we think. Maybe sometimes out of necessity, out of a utilitarian need. But we must again be, this is why I love the type of art that I do. Why? Because there I break the boundaries. Like Father Mark, he likes to break the boundaries sometimes to improve our social life and what. But anyway. So, other contemporary authors there, even the idea of an abstract category. But there's one type of category that I'm going to refer to later on. Because again, we're using a meta-language. It is a language on language, abstractness, the idea of property, relation, proposition, event, time, place, material object, spirit, limit, collection, privation. Privation is the concept, the Greek concept, which has been used over the ages also in philosophy, which means the state of being before being. It's quite a difficult concept, but it's used very much in ontology. There is one very nice mention when you sort of look up the literature a bit on categories. And it's called the Ryle-Husserl method. Because I'm going not to refer to Husserl at this point, although I refer to Husserl many times in my lectures. I like him especially for introducing the concept of noema and noesis. Noema, what causes, and the noesis, what is caused. That was the origination of Husserl. But anyway, what I am interested here is in the contribution of Ryle. We'll mention Wilbert Ryle again, where he thinks Ryle famously considered absurdities to be the key to detecting category differences, as if absurdities are some type of radioactive transmission. Absurdities are like indicators, markers, that will help you point to categories. And then if we go back to from where I started, the idea of nonsense. Usually we connote nonsense with absurdity a lot. In philosophy, this reminds us of what we call the liar's paradox. I have to know the truth to know that that is a lie, right? So what Ryle is suggesting here that through absurdities we can identify categories if we use the higher order type of thinking. And of course, I am very much in love with this idea of absurdity. Because for me, absurdity in art is not absurdity, but it's a marker. It's pointing. They are pointers. Absurdities are pointers. That's why we love, because we understand what these markers are telling us, what these references are telling us. There's a funny painting that I made myself. So, this is Mr. and Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. It's the same painting. But there you see at the bottom there is a moustache. Seems to be the identification detail of Mr. Topsy-Turvy. But if you turn the painting upside down, then you have Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. So see interpretation, position, right? And for me this, of course, happened. I let my art give birth to itself. And when I was drawing this picture, I realized that I could do that, so that was not intentional. It's a bit funny, but you see, it's the same picture. And if you just turn its position as a different interpretation, whereby we can also assign sort of the female and the male or whatever. This is slightly different. This is slightly different picture. It's the humankind's moratorium is over. And there again I depict sadness through a face. So you can again tell so many things through faces. An interesting contribution to the interpretation of categories comes, of course, from Frege. And Frege treats distinctions in categories as correlates of distinctions in types of linguistic expression. Now we're being a bit technical. But what Frege was trying to say, that the category, for example, of object, when I say the word object, is distinguished by reference to the linguistic category of a proper name. And with him is the famous philosopher of language, Dummett, in agreement with Frege. So what is it? It is in reasoning, not in thinking. Because probably when we think, we can't commit mistakes. Because especially on my own, a person, on his or her own, if we respect personal space, are so free to think of what I want to think, that we human beings, we are very sensitive creatures. Don't usually attribute the idea of mistake when somebody thinks. But a category mistake is an error in logic, that is in reasoning, in which one category of something, and you realize now how many categories there are, is presented as belonging to another category. So, for example, to say that the metal is alive assigns the category of life to that which is not alive. The term category mistake, I used to really take pleasure lecturing the philosophy of mind with my students, and Gilbert Ryle is one of the most famous philosophers on mind. And they actually used to have this book, The Concept of Mind, for our A-level syllabus, and I did this for a number of years with my students. The term category mistake was introduced by Gilbert Ryle in his book, The Concept of Mind, to remove what he argued to be a confusion over the nature of mind, born from Cartesian metaphysics. Of course, Descartes used to think that we consist, like so many people do, that we consist of two entities, the body or a ghost and a ghost. That's why we call the Cartesian theory the ghost in the machine theory. And of course, Gilbert Ryle points out to the mistake that Descartes was committing, and so many millions still do, when they think of a person, and let's call it a human organism, because person brings other connotations. A human organism consists of literally so many people still believe a ghost. And actually this is a very favorite theme in my paintings. I have a number of paintings depicting ghosts, but with a smile, that there is this ghost. This category mistake, of course, was explained actually by Descartes himself, but he never admitted that he was committing this type of mistake. Why? Because he described the body as something physical, something that extends in space, has got weight. And then when he came to describe the ghost, it's better we call it a ghost, because if we call it a mind, maybe we would be mistaken a bit. So the ghost, when he came to describe the ghost, he described the ghost in negative terms. That is, a ghost doesn't occupy space. A ghost hasn't got weight. But at the end of the day, of the story, then I tell you, okay, tell me what the ghost is. You're equipped with nothing but negative terms. I say there is an object on Mars. Has it got legs? Has it got wings? Has it got a nose? Has it got this? Has it got this? And I tell you, what is it? You have to tell me, I don't know. But of course, Descartes didn't say we don't know. He defined something which is non-existent in the negative terms, not the non, because the non in logic means something else. The non is the complement, we call it in logic. In negative terms. And in negative terms, you can't define. You can only create an empty category. So this is why the phrase category mistake became very famous in philosophy through the work of Gilbert Ryle in his book, The Concept of Mind. But this is just one example of a category mistake. There are thousands, a plurality of thousands of category mistakes that we carry with us in our minds, especially in our everyday life. That's a sentence attributed to the famous linguist Noam Chomsky. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously, which for me is a beautiful composition of ideas. But there have been thousands of articles and hundreds of books written on this sentence, trying to find out whether this utterance, let's call it an utterance, because actually it's not a sentence, this utterance has got sense or it's just nonsense. So colorless green ideas sleep furiously is a sentence composed by Noam Chomsky in his 1957 book called Syntactic Structures. Of course, we know that Chomsky was a linguist and he was very much interested in syntax. When we say syntax, it means how we bring sentences together. That's syntax, right? Especially to prove the grammatical correctness of a sentence. So, if we go now to what we used to call, I used to practice what we call them syntactic trees when I was doing my first degree at university. That's called transformational grammar. Again, it's a term we borrow from Chomsky. But there on top you have S, which is the sentence, then NP, which is the noun phrase. In a way, he's borrowing a bit from Aristotle, because Aristotle, when he defined what a proposition is, the atomic sentence, he said there must be three components. The noun, the object that is, the copula, the verb, and then the predication. But here we have slightly different terminology, but this is grammar, now it's not logic. The sentence, the noun phrase, NP, and then we have the variable phrase, which is VP, and then it branches out. This is why we call them trees. At the bottom in red, you see colorless, which is an adjective. Green, again adjective. ID is noun. Sleep, verb. Furiously, adverb. So there are bits and pieces of grammar. But, of course, for many people, if at least they are not poetically inclined, would think of that sentence as being nonsense. But it has all the constituents of a true grammatical sentence. It even has a noun phrase and a verbal phrase, and also a verb. It has all the constituents of a sentence, but we don't recognize it as a sentence. Why? Probably the reason is, I know why this is. Maybe people didn't mention this before, but there is this idea in philosophy that language is public. I can't make what I want out of the rules of language. So if it doesn't, an utterance, fit in with what is public, in the terms of understanding, then it is labeled as being nonsense. A famous philosopher, Bertrand Russell, again used the sentence, quadruplicity drinks procrastination. And again, if we apply the syntactic tree analysis, that is transformation grammar, we would see that it fits in everything. It is in an inquiry to meaning and truth. The meaning and truth Quine, which again is a very modern philosopher of language, took issue with him on the grounds that for a sentence to be false is nothing more than for it not to be true. And since quadruplicity doesn't drink anything, the sentence is simply false, not meaningless. And here you see again that modern philosophers, the philosophers of language, the verificationists, always put this idea of truth when they are talking about sense, when they are talking about meaning. Right? Some way or another they have to put this idea of truth. Now let's go a bit to the concept of fallacies. In the textbook, again, we usually distinguish between what we call formal fallacies and informal fallacies. Fallacy in logic is erroneous reasoning, not thinking, reasoning, that has the appearance of, here this writer is using a very intelligent word to avoid the word truth, validity. He's using, or she's using here, soundness. What is sound? But again, we're totally lost, because what is sound for you might not be sound for me. You see the boundaries, how much they crisscross in the way we reason and we think. Different types of kinds of logical fallacies. It's a very debated issue, especially again when I used to introduce my young people at college to these fallacies, then I would hear them in the corridors quoting the names of the fallacies. So they are very much used by opponents when they are reasoning things out, you know. Our logical fallacies hide truths, so pointing them is very, very useful. And there is a big number of informal fallacies. Usually, if we want to put how most people, there are again so many classifications on how to distinguish between formal and informal reasoning and fallacies. But this is a nice diagram. There is this idea of material logic, the verbal and formal reasoning. The 1 and 2 give us the informal, and the 2 and 3 give us the logical. That's a bit technical, so I don't want you to try to digest that, especially those who don't have a formal background of logic. The first, again, known systematic study of fallacies, again we find it in Aristotle, in the Sophistical Refutations, an appendix to his topics. He listed 13 types. In the Dark Ages, they gained, again, importance. And in the Dark Ages, explanations, a false belief, etc., etc. Should we teach informal fallacies to our students? This is, again, very hotly debated, because some people say we don't teach our students when we're doing mathematics the errors in mathematics, although I think we do, because you have to point errors. But again, I think that we should do. There are, again, many types: relevant reason, ad hominem, appeal to pity, affirming the consequent, fallacy of accent, amphiboly, equivocation. These all carry technical names. For example, if we take the word appeal, there are so many types of fallacies. Now, they are not mentioned in the usual textbooks that we give to students, so I pick different ones. Appeal to past practice. So, in the process of reasoning, I can make an appeal to past practice, which would be fallacious, could be an error. Appeal to pity. This is a very famous one. It's a story where a young man killed his mother and father. But when he went to court, he was pleading to the magistrate, "Won't you have pity on an orphan?" It's appeal to pity. See? Appeal to snobbery, appeal to the gallery, appeal to the mob, appeal to the masses, appeal to the stick, the yardstick, that is. Appeal to vanity. So many types. Argumentum ad ignorantem, I was going to say it in Latin, an argument from ignorance. Now, ignorance was a concept that Aristotle talked a bit about, but when we say argumentum ad ignorantiam, the argument from ignorance, it is when you assert or deny something, the knowledge of which actually you don't have. So, I can't assert whether there is any other planet that has intelligent life like our planet. Because if I would assert, I would be arguing ad ignorantiam. Of course, I can make a probable conclusion, like the astrophysicists do, but I can never say that that is true. Line drawing. If we improperly reject a fake claim because it is not as precise. Sometimes we reject a process of an argument because it's not precise. Bandwagon. If you suggest that someone's claim is correct simply because it's what most everyone is coming to believe, then you are using the bandwagon fallacy. Beside the point, when people argue, or we again call it the irrelevant conclusion, when we argue beside the point. bifurcation, cherry picking. These are names that you don't find them in the normal textbook. This is another name for the fallacy of suppressed evidence. For example, the church sometimes suppresses scientific evidence, and that's a fallacy. And the church should be on the side of the truth. Not only the church, but sometimes we do it even ourselves. Circular leasing, or begging the question, petitio principii, they call it in Latin. If I ask you what is a fridge, you will tell me it's a fridge, right? Clouding the issue, common belief appeal to complex question. This is a very important one in our lives because one important example is somebody asking questions in court and would ask, where were you when you killed that somebody? And of course, the person being questioned can innocently say in the bedroom. And by that, it can be interpreted that the questioner would be, the person questioning would say, oh, so you see, you were in the bedroom. Of course, when we are asked or we find ourselves in the complex question situation, we have to split apart into more simple ones and more clear ones. Fallacy of composition, this is why I said the comma when I presented you with the first picture is very important. Because there is a difference between smiling, comma, women and spaghetti. And if I remove the comma, it would be smiling women and spaghetti. There is a difference in meaning. Confusing an explanation with an excuse. Equivocation is the illegitimate switching of the meaning of a term during reasoning. And this we do a lot. We do a lot. False analogy. This again, we do a lot. Politicians do it a lot. They bring an analogy. Of course, since they would be in a position of a stage performance, people usually believe them. Hasty generalization. Now we come to metaphor. Those are some examples of metaphor. And there you see again to what an extent is metaphor sensical or not. I love metaphors, And again, there is much technical analysis, the tenor, the vehicle concepts of analyzing metaphors. But look at some of them. Brevity is the soul of wit. There is a tide in the affairs of man. I think of beauty is a joy forever. Is this true or not? The winter of our discontent. Silence is golden. Every cloud has a silver lining, which is not true, actually. Okay? Again, so many types of different types of metaphors. Cognitive metaphor, conceptual metaphor, etc., etc. I'll present you with some pictures of my own. That's a glimpse of misfortune, twisting her toe. I like to play with words, I like nonsense, which for me it's not nonsense. A cosmic tombola. Can we have a cosmic tombola? In art, of course, we can. This is again a contradiction in terms. A galaxy yet to be discovered. How do I know? How do I paint it if it is yet to be discovered? But you see the sarcastic smile. A little fiasco when compared to bigger ones. It's always the smile. A pair of cat eyes following a mouse. which pair of eyes? Which pair of eyes does humanity apply to interpretation, or the astronomer? Because of course the astronomer is always looking, but I'm using the astronomer symbolically. Bathing woman with a tribute to Cézanne. You know, Cézanne has a very famous picture of bathing woman, but it's my interpretation. One-eyed prisoners in green hats, mocking the illusion of reality. Are we all human beings in that situation? Are we one-eyed prisoners? It's a very simple painting. The color should be white in the background. The Blind Man, with a tribute to Duchamp, because Duchamp, when he was exhibiting, actually he produced a journal, called it The Blind Man, because his paintings and his works of art were refused. Maybe it reminds us to that article that I mentioned before. This is a favorite of mine again. A composition of the semiotic of space and time with color gives so many interpretations. One long hug of one lesbian couple, and you can see the lesbian couple, with grandma watching against the secret police, which reminds me of the Jewish persecution, and of course also the persecution of same-sex couples. The multiple faces of Zenobia. Zenobia was a character. This is how I feel. And that probably is the last one. Is our knowledge just a peeping into reality? I called that painting Knowledge of as Peeping of Reality, Lady Godiva. There was this story, there was this king, who was a terrible one, but he used to let a naked lady during the night, and nobody was allowed to look at her. So I am trying to think of the humankind of us as peeping toms. We only peep. There is so much confusion in language. There are so many categories that we can mistake, so many fallacies that we can make, that reality remains just a small peeping. Okay, I think it's time for...
We'd like to thank Dr. Karl Borġ for a very educational talk. I enjoyed it a lot. It taught me lots of things. Next month we will have our next public talk on 2nd September. It will be by Karl. The topic will be sex and the self. Something different. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.